President Trump has just said out loud what a lot of people have suspected all along, that regime change in Iran would be the best thing that could possibly happen. He said this while talking about sending more U.S. firepower to the region and warning that things could get very traumatic if Tehran doesn't accept his demands. At the very same time, the Pentagon is now pulling the Navy's newest and largest carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, out of the Caribbean, fresh off its operations linked to Venezuela, and sending that carrier to join the USS Abraham Lincoln, which has been on station for a couple weeks. So now you soon to have two carriers in the regions. You have F-35s that have come fresh off Venezuela operations that have now flowed to the region. You're starting to look at a toolkit that, if you're thinking sustained operations and sustained pressure against the Iranian regime day after day, it's starting to build up. Let's dive into the hardware that we know is on the move first. The Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group has been ordered out of the Central Caribbean, is now heading to the Middle East. Again, this has joined the USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group that is already in the Middle East. The Ford is the Navy's newest supercarrier. It's nuclear powered and it has electromagnetic catapults, advanced sensors, and it sails with an air wing of roughly 70 to 75 aircraft. The crucial piece here is both the Ford and the Lincoln carry the E-18 Growler. This is the Navy's dedicated electronic attack jet, alongside its brother, the F-18 Strike Fighter, E-2D Hawkeyes for that command and control, as well as a variety of helicopters. So soon you'll have two carrier decks in the region, both with electronic attack capability, both with SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. Now, we'll talk about it here in just a minute, and we've talked about other videos, the F-16 Block 50 and SEAD, and how crucial this is when we're talking about an adversary that has advanced surface-to-air missile systems and integrated air defenses. So on top of the carrier movement, we have the Vermont Air National Guard F-35As. They were crucial in the Venezuela operation and are now redeploying to the Middle East. They've been staging through Europe, moving towards the United States Central Command area of responsibility. While these jets specialize in a whole host of things, air defenses, specifically suppression of enemy air defenses and precision strike, is a key capability they bring to the fight. So while we have already had F-35s in the region and flowing to the region, we're now bringing an F-35 squadron that is fresh off Venezuela with lessons learned, as well as integrating with USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group. This is a key piece when it comes to military operations. Now, carriers obviously don't teleport, and they're not cheap political prop. However, I do think moving a carrier group is much easier than mobilizing multiple fighter squadrons. Think a typical fighter squadron, when it deploys, it's moving 12 jets on average, plus or minus. You now have the carrier strike group that's moving 70 plus jets into the region and doing it in a matter of weeks. Now, while the Air Force can absolutely match that, and they might be doing that right now, mobilizing multiple squadrons, and they can get them there faster than 3 weeks. However, you do have a whole logistical supply train that comes along with it. That is a big piece and big component of this. And we've already seen that Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates have said no operation can be conducted from its air, land, or sea, which is a critical challenge when it comes to the United States Air Force conducting operations in the region, because we need those pieces of land and we need their sky in order to operate and conduct operations, at least without complicating things even further. So again, diving back into it, the Carrier Strike Group is not a cheap political prop. Moving from the Central Caribbean to the Middle East, you're looking anywhere from like 3 to 6 weeks. I would imagine it's probably going to get faster on that 3-week side, given how everything is going. The timeline alone tells you this is a leverage piece for the next round of negotiations, not necessarily a strike package, because this is an incomplete strike package, in my opinion, if we're going to do sustained operations. But watch and see what else flows to the region over the next few weeks. That also might be a telltale sign. Nonetheless, once the Ford gets there, this second flight deck does change the math. Now, the Ford is designed for EMALS, the electromagnetic catapult system, not the steam catapult system, with advanced resting gear. It's a more efficient deck layout. It is built to generate more sorties per day than the older Nimitz-class carriers, especially with sustained operations. So you add that into the Lincoln, now you basically have doubled your carrier-based strike, ISR, and electronic attack capacity in the region. Now, this is not the end-all be-all. If we're talking about sustained operations, which I'll dive to in a little bit, this isn't the complete solution. And it's starting to be the difference between one big opening night strike package and having enough assets to reattack, defend, and put pressures on enemy air defenses, command nodes, and proxy infrastructure around the region. But again, there's a lot that goes into this. From a fighter pilot perspective, there is continuity in who's doing this work, and the lessons learned that were undoubtedly figured out in Venezuela with Vermont's F-35As, part of that suppression of enemy air defenses, coupled with operating with the United States Navy, the E-18 Growlers from the carrier wing that handled the jamming, some electronic attack, disruption of communications and sensors. Those lessons learned are invaluable. And I guarantee there are a lot of lessons learned of that interoperability between those different services and those different fighter aircraft that bringing them to the fight, they're going to be able to share these lessons with other assets in the region that are, again, are invaluable. So now you have Vermont's F-35s, you have Growlers from the USS Gerald R. Ford, all being positioned in the region. Now, the geography and the threat laydown are completely different. Iran's air defense network is undoubtedly much denser and better equipped than Caracas could field. But I think we're missing a couple key players when it comes to any operation that might be conducted inside Iran. Just as important as what we have seen moving is what we haven't seen moving. And so far, we haven't seen any F-16 Block 50s or Block 52s, the Wild Weasel squadrons that do bring that kinetic sea capability. Now, the Growlers do carry HARM, the high-speed anti-radiation missile, but the Block 50 F-16, the bread and butter of that mission set, which was utilized in Operation Midnight Hammer, is crucial to any operations that might be conducted inside Iran, in my opinion. So the big sexy thing out there is all the reporting on the carrier air wing and the F-35 deployments, tankers enabling the movement, ISR flowing into the region, the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. We have not seen the F-22. At least that's made it into open source reporting. Any type of strike package, again, like we saw in Operation Midnight Hammer, you would expect to see F-22s. A lot of people might say, well, Iran doesn't have fighters or an air threat that you need to worry about. I would disagree. You're not going to go into this environment, this high-end threat environment, without your air dominance fighter. While the F-16, the F-18, and the F-35 can all do air-to-air, the F-22 was bred to go out there and dominate the skies, and you're not going to leave them out of the party. So if we zoom back out, the diplomatic track is still technically alive. The indirect talks in Oman ended with both sides calling it a good start, promising to keep talking, but no real progress on the core issues. Iran's enrichment capability, their ballistic missiles, proxy forces, and domestic repression. And again, remember from our other videos, Iran's foreign minister saying that we're not going to talk about unrealistic things, such as their ballistic missile capabilities, proxy forces in the region, and really the domestic repression and aggression that's going on inside the country. So realistically, who's going to move on the demands? I guess we'll find out. From Tehran's perspective, I would imagine a lot of those demands already look a lot like regime change in their mind. Again, they heavily rely upon proxies, ballistic missiles for defense and offensive operations. So accepting any of this would be permanently constraining their military and their political role and their ability to operate the way they've been doing. So now when you layer in President Trump saying the best thing would be a regime change, you throw in a carrier strike group and then another one, more F-35s, more fighters flow into the region. It appears to be a lot more leverage when it comes to breaking the regime's will in these negotiations. So now, Midnight Hammer versus sustained operations. This, in my opinion, would not be Midnight Hammer 2. We could absolutely conduct a single strike overnight, but if we're talking regime change now, this whole thing becomes much different, moving more towards the sustained operations. And I'd argue too, I don't know if we've seen air power alone conduct a regime change. We don't really have a great track record for that. If Washington was preparing a surprise decapitation strike against the regime, again, I think this is much more complicated than Venezuela. Their military, their army, all of it is completely different. So you're not going to just be one and done. And you're going to need a lot more assets in order to conduct these sustained operations. Again, I've already alluded to F-16s, F-22s, etc., that need to be in the region. And there's going to have to be a lot more military might to come to bear in order to conduct these sustained operations. Instead, what it appears we're getting is more visible moves, very visible moves, carrier strike groups. And that is not an insignificant order and an insignificant movement. Additionally, Vermont F-35s, to me, that definitely is a big signal across the globe that you have experienced F-35 people fresh off operations moving next door. And with the president leading into regime change on camera, I think it is a telltale sign and a huge turn of the corkscrew to ratchet up pressure on the Iranian regime. Two carrier strike groups with over 100 jets, F-35s fresh off Venezuela doing suppression of enemy air defenses. No F-16 Block 50s yet, nor F-22s. This still appears to be a big posture that is gearing up for sustained operations and some psychological operations as it appears, as the commander-in-chief says the quiet part out loud about regime change. So what should we watch for next to see if the pressure stays on or if this thing is going to go kinetic or diplomatic? One, the Oman talks, what the next round of Oman talks or wherever they decide to host that, how that one pans out, if there's any movement. If we see additional assets moving to the region, again, those Block 50 F-16s, F-22s, that would be a signal if things are starting to ratchet up. I think we're going to continue to see the behavior out of the Iranian regime with these AI videos, the threatening and the harassing of forces in the region, both with proxy forces and their own forces. But I'd be curious to hear what you think. Does this kind of build up make a serious deal more possible with Tehran at the table? Or is it going to kick it another direction and end up into a full-on campaign? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you like this content, by leaving a comment, you help it get shown to more people. With that being said, I'll see you next time.